save it, close it, come back, and no, you really liked the first one, but now you can't quite remember exactly how you worded it. If all you were doing was standard saving in your file system, you're kind of out of luck. But if you were using Git, you would have access to that original paragraph. Because what it does is it keeps track of the individual text changes within files as you check them in with commits. So saving a file normally is just the same way you save anything on your computer. And then committing through Git is how you check in. You take a snapshot of that file's state and time, and then Git, instead of storing a million copies of that file, because even with text documents, that's a lot of data, it only tracks the changes from one save to the next. It is extremely useful in code specifically, especially as a collaboration tool, because it lets you hunt down bugs. It lets you hunt down historically how something may have worked way back when, earlier in the version history. And it's very, very useful. I've used it in every tech job I've had. I expect to continue to do it the rest of my career unless something brilliant comes out that replaces it, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. GitHub, and they are not the same thing, is a service primarily run through the website github.com that lets you store Git repos, which is short for repository, and you can kind of think of it as the project itself, the individual collection of files you're keeping track of. So in the case of our analogy, that would be the novel as a whole with all of its one file per chapter setup. So what we're going to go over tonight is we're going to go over setting up Git on your computer for your first time, doing a very bare bones index.html that we're going to make a couple changes to show how the history works. We're going to get GitHub set up, including with your SSH key, which you need to connect. And we're going to push our repository to GitHub just to kind of illustrate all the differences there. I'll be going slow enough that you can follow along, but I won't be pausing to make sure everyone can catch up. So like Emily said, this is going to be recorded, and there are lots of people happy to help in Slack, especially in the Git and GitHub channel. So let's share a screen. Okay, so to get started, we're going to open Git Bash, which hopefully you have downloaded. If you have not, you're going to... This is the place to do it. I'm going to stick this in the chat, or I was. Where is it? There we go. Come on. Okay, well, apparently I'm not amazing at Zoom, but it's git.scm.com. That is going to give you the base wrapper, and that will also give you Git Bash, which is the shell. Now, shell being, that's good job. All right.
I shared that link in chat. So
Thank you. I appreciate it. I was trying to make this bigger, hit the wrong button. I think you guys have been shown how to navigate through shell at this point in the course, but if not, we're going to do just a real simple refresher. This is exactly like Explorer. In this case, it would be, yeah. This window and this window are exactly the same, but one of them you navigate with graphical icons, and one of them you navigate by typing commands. And I know that I am in this, this is the home user folder. And I know, just because this is how it works, that when you see the tilde here, that means you are in your home folder. And so if we were to do the ls command to see what we have available, it would be the same. This is not the same. This is not showing hidden folders or anything, but we can get to the desktop from here by going change directory desktop. Whoops, if it's spelled right. And now it says we're at the desktop, ls here. Yeah, I don't have anything on my desktop because I dumped it all in a folder right before this started. And then to go back to the user folder, dot is short for this folder we are currently in right now. Dot means go up one folder, go into the parent. That sort of, the dot and the dot slash are also known as relative paths, and are very important, especially if you are going to use images or anything else in your projects, because this see users Leigh, that folder doesn't exist on your computer. If I made a project that went and found a image and it's in my documents folder under my Code Louisville project folder, you don't have that you don't have that same folder structure, so that image doesn't exist. So it's going to be broken on someone else's computer. Not the point. I'm sorry. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a new folder. You can do it here. I'm going to do it in here. Make directory git example. Cd git, and then move into it by changing directory git example. And so that is the same thing as being here. Another thing, you want in general one repository per folder, and you do not want to make repositories inside of each other. We will get to a very common issue people have when they first start using Git here in a minute. For now, though, let's make something to commit. You can generally, if you have Visual Studio Code installed, you probably also have this shortcut installed, which says for all, open this folder in the context of Visual Studio Code. And so that means that when I do this and we go back, index.html now exists within this folder. So in this case, we're going to write really bad HTML that don't write HTML like this. I'm skipping a lot, but we're doing it this way because it's short. The classic. And then if we open that in Firefox, hello world. Now we want to commit it. Visual Studio Code does have its own shell instance. So every command that we are typing in here, you can also type in here, and it is already in the context of the folder we need because it's already in that git ex folder. So in either terminal, you're going to type git init. And now we can tell that we are in a Git repository because it says master right here. It might say main depending on the version of Git you have installed. That's a recent change, and I just haven't updated because I'm lazy. Master or main are the default names of your main branch. We're not going to get a whole lot into branches tonight. They are important, but this is a lot of information coming at you very fast. It's more important to know that there is a concept that exists called branches, and when you're more comfortable with the basics, you can then kind of explore the more in-depth options. So, and then if we, yeah, and then this is the same here. And so what we have done is told the folder well, actually what we did is we created a hidden folder. It's hidden, you can't see it, called .git. And that is where all of the metadata Git needs is going to be stored. And that is the only thing that makes this a repository. If for some reason I didn't want this to be a Git repository anymore, we would delete that folder. And you do that by doing this. Be very careful with the rm-rf command, because it will delete everything in the folder you are, if you mistype it, if you just do this, it will delete everything in the folder you are currently in and all of its children. So make sure you have it spelled correctly and typed out exactly what you want before you use it. So now that it's run, you see that we no longer have the parentheses here. We are no longer in a Git repository, not a Git repository. And so we're gonna run it again. And so our index.html file is not tracked. You have to tell Git which files you care about having tracked. There are some files that are automatically generated depending on what kind of project you're using. Like if you are building a Node.js project, you absolutely do not want to commit Node modules. It is gigantic, and it's always gigantic, and it's not necessary, because the package.json file tells the whomever pulled your project down which dependencies it needs. And if you didn't understand anything of what I said about Node and modules and packet, don't worry about it, not relevant for tonight. But come back later and you'll understand.
Leigh,
yeah.
Someone has asked if you make the Visual Studio Code window text a little bit larger.
Yep. Sorry about that. But okay. All right, so at this point, we have not tracked anything. You can also do a file called a git ignore that will do exactly what it says on the tin. You list out the files in there that you want Git to not pay attention to. We're not going to do that right now. What we are going to do is get this file ready to be tracked. And the way we do it is we stage it or add it. And there are a couple different ways to do this, because we only have one file. We can do index.html, or we can do asterisk to indicate all, or, and this is my preference, you could do dot, because again, dot means everything in this folder right here. And so now when we run git status again, it says that, oh yeah, you are ready to commit this file, and it's not been committed yet. It's brand new. It's not been tracked at all yet. The reason why this and committing are separate steps is you might be in a case where you have a bunch of files, one isn't quite doing what you want it to do, so you're not ready to check it in yet, but everything else really needs to be saved. And so you would individually add the files you want added and then commit those. And then that commit will not touch that last file, even if it has changes, and you can keep working on it. Most of the time though, you're just going to add everything in your folder. So git add dot is very common. And then we want to actually write a commit. And so to do this, to do git commit, I always do -m so I can just give it a quick message, because you always want to give a message or a note with your commit that describes what you have done. Create it index.html and then hit enter. Haha, I messed up. I unset my environment before we got here so that I would run into this error when I got ahead of myself. Before we can do any of this, we have to tell Git who we are, because every commit is signed so that the people you're working with know who did what work. And so in this case, it's telling us exactly what we need to do to fix this. So git config -- global user.email. I also recommend you just make this the same information you have signed up it within GitHub, because GitHub will automatically associate via your email address and say like, oh, that's this user who did this. And it looks nice and is helpful. And that is my GitHub email, git config -- global user.name, Leigh Luerman. Now we could do this. And it worked. And if we run, sorry, you can hit up on your keyboard and it scrolls back through commands that you've done recently. That's what I did. And so now if we run git status again, there's nothing to commit because we have committed all of our changes. Okay, what do we want to do? So the other way to write commits, which is the quote unquote long form way, is we make a change. You don't have to use git status as much as I'm doing it, but I like to do it when I'm explaining Git because it kind of helps you see what's going on more instead of just going, now do this command, now do that command. So in this case, it says like, oh, okay, index.html has been modified. And unlike the last time, it doesn't say untracked because we have tracked it once, but it says modified because it's been changed. And we can even see exactly what the changes are by going git diff. So never two, it's two. And in this case, we have added one line, the paragraph tag, how are you? If you had more than one file, it would show them all in this list here. And so again, git add everything, modified, and it's in green to show that it has been staged for commit. And this time, you just do git commit without the -m. M stands for, I think it says for message. Now it's going to take us into a command line based text editor, and you and then you forget how to get out of it. There we go. I hit escape, and then we're gonna okay. No. Right. Okay. So it's you hit escape to get into the context of typing a command instead, :W for write or save because you write to disk, and then Q to quit. I think you could do QW, but that didn't work. Maybe it's WQ. I don't use that one a lot. So that's fine. And if you were needed to write a long commit message, which you almost never do, that is useful. But for the most part, in my opinion, the easiest thing is to just do it in one line. You hit enter and you're done. If you ever mess up and you don't want to run something, you can hit Control-C. Even if you're on a Mac, it's Control-C. And that will cancel your command. And that is for any command line, terminal, shell thing, not just Git. Because Git is technically a program we are running within the context of this Git bash application. So we have a change. Let's check the log. So this is, here are our two commits. It shows who did it, and it pulled that information from the global config that we set up a minute ago. And it shows the changes we've made, the most recent ones first. So here's my note, here's my note. If for some reason we needed to go back, you need the commit ID, which is this long string, and then you check it out. And as you might see, we lost that extra paragraph tag. It reverted us back. But we are in the context of this commit. We haven't actually gotten rid of it. We're just we have traveled back in time and are observing, but we haven't created any ripples to trigger the butterfly effect. And then I just checked out the base branch, and it took me to the head of the branch, which is the most recent commit, the most recent version. All right, so, all right, now we are ready to set up GitHub. And the first thing we need to do is create an SSH key. SSH stands for Secure Shell and is a way for computers to talk to each other in a secure manner. It's a I'm blanking on the best way to describe it. But essentially, you are given two keys when you create it, a public key and a private key. The private key is private, you keep it to yourself. The public key you can give out to anyone. And once they have the public key, they can take it and say, oh, hey, I want to do this thing. You gave me this public key, and then your computer can compare it against the private key and say, oh, yes, these were meant to go together. Therefore, this connection is secure. You could probably find someone to explain that better than I just did. I have these pre-typed. Whoops. I didn't see. I'm just going to start over like that. You can also find these really easily if you just look up adding SSH key to GitHub. We are doing Git, not GitHub, but right now, but GitHub has a fantastic guide on this. And I will, actually, I'm just gonna, yeah. Okay, a file in which to save it. Most of the time, the default's going to be fine. If you already have an SSH key on your computer with this default name, then you're going to want to change it. I backed mine up and cleared it out of the main folder before we did this, so no problem. Hit enter, passphrase. For this class, I encourage you to keep this empty because otherwise you're going to have to type it every single time you try to do an authentication. And now we have a public key. So in this case, what we did is we ran the program SSH keygen, and we used this is the name of an algorithm it's using to generate the key. And then this is who we are and the owner of it. Then there's a way to do this automatically, but I always forget. So I'm just going to open it with a bad. Yeah, don't look at my secrets. It doesn't matter. I'm going to dump this key when we're done. Okay, so now that we have the key, we need to add it to the SSH agent. This is the program that's going to be running to do the verification process I talked about before, where it compares the private key and the public key, because computers get a lot of random commands thrown at them. There has to be a program running to handle what it wants, otherwise it doesn't work. Okay. It's running already, and the way we know that is because it has a process ID. Every program on your computer has a process ID. You can use this process ID to kill a program, make it stop, force quit. We're not going to do that. And then we are going to do another command called SSH add. And in this case, we are using a relative path. And this path is home folder, the hidden.ssh folder, and then the file name, which of course matches this one here. Identity added. So now it is aware that we have an SSH key in this location that belongs to my email address that can be used for authentication purposes. So now that the computer is ready, we need to tell GitHub what we're doing. So let's go to GitHub. And then this is, your base. Going to pick, let's see, what is it? Profile? Nope. Settings. I can't read. There's nothing like having someone watch you use a computer that makes it all go out of your head. All right, so from here, your settings, we are going to pick SSH and GPG keys. This here is the link I was talking about. So if you go to add an SSH key and you're not sure, you need examples of all those complicated commands that I just copied and pasted from this text document on my other screen. This will walk you through it and completely hold your hand. So the answer is always out there. Just go look it up. And this is one of those cases where I have to generate SSH keys so infrequently that I look it up every time, because there's no reason not to take a few extra minutes, even if you think you remember it, and double check. It's more important to know what is possible than remember exactly how to do it, because you can always look up how to do it. All right. So in this key, example key, you can name it whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then, from the public folder, add SSH key. Sure, never been used. And then I don't remember how to ping, so I'm going to use this, here we go, to test the connection. In this case, all we're doing is poking GitHub and saying like, hey, is this SSH connection, is this valid? And GitHub will tell us if it's authenticated or not. So ssh-t git@github.com. Yep. Okay, this warning is just telling us, hey, you have accessed it, but you don't have shell access through GitHub. Some services will let you connect to them directly through your shell and type commands out instead of going through their UI. GitHub does not, and that's okay. We don't need it. But now we have connected successfully. It's probably still says never used. We have now successfully connected our authentication scheme to GitHub. That's the most complicated thing we're doing tonight. And all the information is GitHub provides it for you. So when in doubt, GitHub, settings, SSH key, and then click, hey, I need one of these guides because I don't remember how to do SSH keys. No problem. Now we need a GitHub repository. So the difference here, it is superficially similar to faxes in that if I fax you a copy of the first chapter of my novel, you don't get the original, and you don't get any updates as I write them unless I fax them to you again. Similarly, if you take a red pen and make a bunch of edits, I don't see that until you fax it back to me. And so in our novel analogy, two copies of the novel exist, and they are roughly in sync with each other if we're faxing back and forth a whole lot, but they are not exactly the same, even though they roughly have the same content. A similar concept exists with Git and GitHub repositories, because we are basically going to set up what is known as a remote repository. This is not exclusive to GitHub. You can do the same thing with another service called GitLab or Bitbucket, or just another drive on your local network. It could be one folder over if you wanted. If for some reason you wanted a double copy on your same machine, it doesn't matter. All Git sees is folder, here's how to get to the folder. So we're going to make a new repository by clicking on that. And this one, example, we're going to leave it public. We are not going to add a README file, because if we do, the histories will be different, and then that's an annoying change we have to make. Basically, all you need to do is give it a name and hit create repository. Everything else doesn't matter. So there are basically two ways to create Git and GitHub projects. You can do computer first or GitHub first. We are doing computer first because we already have changes on the repository on our computer, but you could totally go into GitHub, set all this up, make a repository, and then pull down a copy of the repository. We are not, though. Okay, and so an existing repository, the first thing we have to do is create a remote. Think of it roughly like an email address or a fax number. You need to know the location of the other, where the other instance of your project is going to live. You have to have a road to follow to get there. GitHub will give you the command, which is very nice. In this case, we are adding a remote. Remote is the name of that connection, that bridge. We are adding a remote. The name of the remote is origin. This can be anything, but the common use name is origin. Not really a reason to ever change it. And then we give it the location of where we want this remote to connect. And we can check this by going get remote V. Haha, I was right. And this says, okay, you have origin and you have fetch and push. Don't worry about fetch right now. We're not going to be dealing with the more intermediate Git things. We're just worried about getting copies of our personal work up on GitHub. The rest of these instructions assume that your branch is called main. Ours isn't, so I'm just going to type them. And it's going to be git push origin u master. Now, there are two main ways you interact with remote repositories. There are other ways, but we're not dealing with them tonight. Pushing and pulling. And it works exactly the way it sounds. You push changes from your machine to the remote machine, and you pull changes from the remote machine to your local machine. Most of the time, you're just going to be doing pushes for this project. Pull becomes much more important when you are collaborating with others, and so you're pulling down different versions of the project a whole bunch of times and dealing with different branches. If anyone is into sci-fi, I think splitting timelines theory, it works exactly like that, except it's text and not, actual temporal alterations. So in this case, running Git, we're going to do a push. We're going to use the name of the remote, which is origin. I think theoretically you could just use this, but that would be a pain to type or remember every time. So we're going to use our shorthand name called origin. This part is optional, and you only need to do it the first time. This is a flag that is short for flag being an option, which is short for upstream, and it is going to make things go faster later. And then you tell it the name of the branch you're wanting to push up, in this case, master. Okay, and then if we refresh our GitHub example, there is index.html. There are our changes. It knows we have 2 commits. There are our commits. These are the same. It will show what we did in each one. And you may notice that it recognizes that the author of this commit was me as the GitHub user version of me because I have it signed with my email address, which is the same as on GitHub. And it recognizes that even though we made these commits before we even connected to GitHub with an SSH key. So that's why it's important to do the global setup. It won't even let you commit unless you do it. Or yeah. And it's important to do the global setup with the same data you are using on GitHub. This is also going to have a, GitHub also does a fun option called, where is it? No. Called blame, which, as you might think, shows who did what changes line by line or who to blame if something went wrong. And oftentimes it's you find out that it's yourself. Okay, so let's push another commit up. But first, we have to have something to change. And we go back. And so just like before, we stage it, git add all. Check it because I like to git commit. And so now if we go to git log, the history, this history has this third commit. This one does not, because even though they are nominally the same project, and we created the GitHub repository by creating a copy of the version on our computer, they are not automatically synced with each other. We have to tell it when to sync, and we do that by pushing again. Now, because earlier where are you? Here. Because earlier when we did this command, we used the upstream flag that I told you was optional. We don't have to type all that again. Now we can just do this, and it will assume that you wanted to push on the upstream that you gave it before. So it pushes to using the same remote and the same branch name as the command you use the upstream for. There are reasons not to do that in more complicated projects, but for your Code Louisville project, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And so now when we refresh, we have our third commit. This also works the other way. So let's go here, and we're going to edit using the GitHub editor, which I don't like to use, but sometimes it's necessary. So we added a fourth paragraph tag, and this is also a commit. So commit the changes, save. And when we go back to the main list, we now have 4 commits. But as you might guess, we only have 3 commits locally. And to get the copy of those commits, because GitHub we didn't set up a remote on GitHub, so GitHub doesn't know the location to our computer, and it doesn't want to anyway. It would rather we do all the work. And so we need to pull down these changes. I think you could just do git pull because we set up the upstream, but in this case, I'm just going to type it so we can go over bits again. So it is exactly like pushing, but you use a different command. We are pulling, bringing something into where we are. We are using the remote named origin that tells us how to get to GitHub. I did this just in case. I honestly don't remember if it's necessary to set up upstream pulling. I don't think it is. I think we're already set up. And so you could just do this. This would work. And then we tell it the name of the branch that we want to pull down. And so when you see this gunk, it tells us that we have made a change. And when we again do git log, now we have all 4 commits. Hooray. And that honestly was all I really wanted to go over. You can get extra complicated by making different branches, which will start by creating a copy of your existing branch. So right now, just a copy of whatever, but then the changes you make on that branch and commit to that branch will not show up here because this is the main branch and a different one. You technically really don't need to know how branches work for this session, and they are really important, but this is a lot of information to throw at you all at once. So I usually try to keep it to just the need to know. Here's an important one. Very, very common mistake. So we're going to return that, not Git, Leigh, come on. We're going to return to our home folder, and you can get to the home folder no matter where you are by typing change directory tilde. And just as a reminder, these windows, whoops, this and this, they are equivalent. They are the same. So very, very common mistake is this right here, is creating a repository in your home folder. And if you do this, you cannot make another Git repository in a project folder because it already thinks it's in a repository because its parent is. And so you see how it still says master here. We're still in that same, not this, but this one that I made just now, and so if I try to run Git init again, I didn't think it was going to work, but it doesn't matter because you don't want that. So the way I did this before, but the way to get rid of it, run -rf.git. It is critically important for your computer that you be 1000% sure you have typed this correctly. Because even though it is an extremely common mistake to create a Git repository in your main folder, if you mistype this, it will delete everything in that folder. Windows might be set up now that it prevents you from deleting system files. I'm not sure. I'm not going to run this command unsafely to find out, but you will lose, that's work. You will lose your pet photos, your children photos, your thesis, everything. So what I like to do when I have to use RMRF is I double check. In this case, let's see, what would it be? I'd be calling it Git repository. And a developer's best friend is, of course, Stack Overflow. Oh, this is ridiculously complicated. This is the one I want. Now, this will delete all of your history, all of your commits. It will only leave you with the versions of, if this was in an actual Git repository you had a project running in, it would remove this, all of the history. So you would still have up-to-date files, but you wouldn't have any of the metadata and you couldn't go back in time or any of that. So in this case, I have it correct. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. So rmr-rf.git. The .git is important because it's a hidden folder. Enter. We are no longer in the context of a Git repository. Problem solved. At least one person on this call will accidentally make a repository of their home folder. It happens. It's not a big deal. The only reason I'm harping on it so hard is because the fix for it, the easy fix for it, which is this, is a little bit dangerous. And so just be very, very careful with that. With the RMRF command is all that I'm getting at. And that is all I had planned, to be honest. So are there any questions? That's all you need to know for your project, by the way. You don't need to know any of the other fancy Git stuff. You just don't have to know how to commit, know how to push. That's it.
And don't be worried if you watch this and you're like, I don't understand this. Once you get into it and you start doing it, you'll start understanding.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things you really have to do it. And by the time you started working on your projects and you make 3-4 commits, you're going to be like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Really just these 3 commands that I use over and over again.
Yeah. I will say, go ahead and set up your project repository now. Do not wait to the last week and go, I don't know how Git works. I told myself I'd figure it out later. Do it now. Get used to making commits. Ask in Slack. No one's going to think you're dumb. Just ask. It doesn't matter if it's something we covered tonight. This talk is going to be recorded so you can go back over it. Just double check and ask. There are also 100 Git cheat sheets out there that show you the short versions of all these commands. It's going to have more commands than you need because Git is very powerful and it does a lot. But all you need to remember is stage it, commit it, push it. Those are the things you're going to be doing all the time. Everything else you only do once. And so there's no shame in just looking it up.
We've had a few questions in the chat. One question is ED25519 the best algorithm? I'm assuming that was when you were setting up your key.
I have no idea. That's the one that it recommends. I am not a cryptographer. It's secure enough for our, these purposes. The most important thing is don't share your private key ever, because if someone has your private key, they can imitate you. So most people are not going to bother trying to crack your stuff, but the only thing you need to remember is keep your private key safe.
Someone commented, as a failsafe, I removed the CD to home part of my Git bash shortcut and have it start in a different folder far away from my user system files.
That's fine. That's totally up to you. It sounds like you very much understand how to navigate the computer directory using text commands, which is excellent. I don't think you're going to accidentally initialize your home directory, but not a bad idea.
Another question, is it possible that my Git bash would create a repo as master, but creating a repo within GitHub would create it as main?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Is it possible that my Git bash would create a repo as master, but creating a repo within GitHub would create it as main?
Yes, GitHub always creates it as main. The default for base Git is still master. You would have to change your your primary branch to be a branch called main. I don't know if it's off the top of my head if it's possible to do that in settings, but the way we did it here, I'm going to open up another blank repository and we can take a look at this. Oops, nope, there we go. So this here, I'm pretty sure is saying change the main or master branch to be a branch called main. I actually don't know if this creates. Oh, let's get back to the right. Oh. There we go. All right, context. Ah, it does. Nice. Okay. Just follow these instructions. It'll handle it for you. But yes, GitHub created repos will always default to main. The old way to do it is it was called master. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you're consistent with whatever one you're using. And GitHub clearly anticipates that your existing repository is not going to be set up the way it wants, and so it includes this command to help.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead and put them in chat or just ask them out loud.
Yep.
Do you have any recommendations regarding naming files in GitHub? For instance, is it common to use an underscore?
Naming files or naming repositories? For files, you want to follow conventions. So technically, that index.html file that we made could be anything.html. Don't name it anything else. Name it index.html, all lowercase. It is the standard convention. It's what is expected. It is what other developers are going to look for to be your base file, your entry point. And most importantly, if you ever decide to host your site, that's the default file name that your web server is going to look for. And you don't want to get in there and start messing with everything else to try to fix it. So stick to standard naming conventions. Generally, those are going to be in not Pascal case, because that starts with capitalization, but what's the other one?
Case.
This case, camel case? Yeah, camel case. This is called snake case, actually. So with the underscores, that's fine. Camel case is going to be more common. When you get outside JavaScript, Pascal case becomes very common, with the first one being capitalized. So long as it's readable, it doesn't matter which one you pick, but please pick one and stick with it. Don't mix and match. And then as far as repository naming, please, as someone who grades Code Louisville projects, do not name your repository Code Louisville project, because there are so many that you end up with. Name it what it is. And so if it is a weather app, I guess name it weather app. We get a bunch of those too. If, Jason's site is even better than Code Louisville project, because not only is it slightly annoying for people who are grading it, when employers look at your GitHub profile and can start comparing, if all they see is Code Louisville project, Code Louisville project, Code Louisville project, you don't stand out. So think of what your project actually is and name your repository based on that.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? All right. Here's another question. When I do the global --config user.name and user.email, it does not show my name at desktop like yours shows in green on the Git bash screen. Any ideas why this is?
That's the name of my computer, because I'd never bothered giving it a custom name because I am very lazy. Don't worry about that. That's not related to Git. No worries.
How would you recommend showcasing our sites through GitHub for a portfolio?
Hosting it on GitHub pages is good. GitHub allows you to have one simple hosted site. It's your username.github.io. Exactly how to set up on GitHub pages is, I'm not going to get into it. It's very easy though. And there are tons of guides. I would do that to either be a portfolio site that showcases other projects within it, or the project you're the most proud of. It's also nice because then people don't have to pull your code down and set it up themselves. They can just go to that one URL and see your project. And people are lazy. Like, I'm super lazy. If you give me a GitHub IO link to grade your project, I appreciate you, because it makes it so much easier to see it. That's of course not an employer standpoint, but people are the same everywhere. But beyond that, just don't look at templates for inspiration, but don't use them, I wouldn't say, because you want to showcase your skills, not that you know how to go find and implement templates. Make it your own, tangentially related. If you want to make stuff your own, you want to stand out, but it is more than okay to make stuff that has already been done. Something I got caught with when I was still learning was I wanted to do something interesting. I didn't want to build a calculator app. I didn't want to do a to-do list app because they've been done a million times. And then I got stuck not being able to decide what to do because everything that I could think of was way outside my skill set at the time. Build the to-do list app. Build the calculator UI. They're not flashy, but they still showcase that you took a project, you broke it into parts, you figured out how to make it, and you made it. Writing the code is more important than the coolest project ever.
Another question here. How do you rename a repository? And if you change name, does that affect all you have pushed previously?
It doesn't affect what you've pushed previously because the name of the repository is mostly, there we go, is mostly just fluff for GitHub. Here. So from your base repository, you're going to go to settings and, pardon, you change the name here. And let me see. Yeah, so that is going to change the name of the remote, I think. Which you can tell, yeah, you can tell by going here. This is this big green code button. This is how you get the code. And so in this case, we are set up with SSH and GitHub knows that, so it defaults here. And this will copy the remote name. And so in this case, if we try to yeah, it doesn't match anymore because the name of the remote has changed. And I actually don't remember how to change remote, so git change remote. Let's find out. Oh, that's easy. So we are gonna, so if you changed, it would be git remote set URL origin, paste. Oh, that's why. Okay. Don't worry about all the extra stuff. It doesn't matter for this example. What I'm getting at is this is what you do. I would just look up how to change the URL, just Google it and follow the what it turns up. Again, this is something I do very, very rarely, so I didn't remember how to do it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for presenting tonight. Git and GitHub is definitely something that it's a little tricky to get into at the very beginning, but as I said, just keep with it. Once you do it 2 or 3 times, it will, at least the 3 commands that you'll do on a frequent basis, you'll understand. And then everything else, as Leigh said, you can look up after that. We will be sharing out this recording in Slack tomorrow. And please join us again next week when we have a discussion on game development with Alex Bazuska, I believe his last name is, from Louisville Makes Games. So thank you all so very much.
Alex is super cool. You guys are going to love him. Yeah. Thanks. I am also on the Code Louisville Slack, so if you have any follow-up questions, ping me. Thanks.
Bye, all.